it's crucial for me to warn anybody who's looking at rhinoplasty that there's heavy consequences to this surgery and it's not a pleasant experience. So I was devastated months after the surgery when the nose was going back into its original position. At first, I could notice a marked improvement in my nasal breathing, but the nose went right back, almost like I had never had the surgery at all. Not even months, man. I mean, it happened fast. It like smacked me right in the nose. But we go to the doctor. The doctor says it's not broken. He called it a minor contusion. And as the years go by, my nose is shifting. We're seeing, based on these photos, a gradual onset of this deviated septum, which isn't consistent with a break. It was actually Dr. Stephen Parks. He has a fascinating video on deviated septums. And so he went on to say that actually what causes this type of deviated septum is a high maxilla. I went to 2 ENTs, went under the knife 2 times. This is the first time I checked. This is the first time anyone has checked. So I put my finger in my mouth. I'm like, holy shit. There it is. There it was all along. This should have been so obvious, especially after the first failed surgery. It's hard not to fantasize about how differently my life would have panned out.
In PUA, there's this whole idea of like social circle game where it's like just be part of a friend group and let other people see you as part of this social network. And that makes you more attractive because you instantly have social proof. Oh, other people like you, therefore you must be likable. In high school, I was always popular effortlessly. I stumbled into it. Then when I went away to college, I was nobody because I never had to understand game explicitly, and confidence was always just assumed upon me. Now I was like totally lost. And a big part of my depression was that I lost my confidence to like deal with women at that time. And when a man feels incompetent in dealing with women and feels like he's not attractive, that fucks you up. Today on Jaw Hacks, I'm having a friend of mine, someone I've spoken with twice before. His name is Jesse. He's in California, and he wants to come on to provide a cautionary tale about the attempted use of rhinoplasty, which is a soft tissue exterior nasal surgery. Jesse can tell us more about what a rhinoplasty is, but Jesse wants to caution us about trying to use a rhinoplasty as a potential nasal airway treatment because that didn't work out for him. So, Jesse, with that introduction, why don't you just dive right in, tell us the thesis of what you want to convey on this chat, and then maybe step back at that point and we can take it a little slower from there.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll just get right into the procedure itself and the aftermath, and then maybe afterward we can go back and I'll talk about my history leading up to it, which is sort of will add some context. But basically, grew up with a deviated septum as a result of what my family and I thought was a broken nose, which turned out not to be true. So.
So
The
what was
first
that like for
rhinoplasty.
you? Did you have nasal breathing troubles like as a youth?
Let's go ahead and start there. Yeah, so I pretty much check like all the boxes for like poor airway and jaw health. So, allergies, um, and asthma-like symptoms, which were probably caused by the allergies, pets in the house, um, and nobody really commented on my nasal breathing at the time or my mouth breathing at the time because this we're talking about early 80s. I'm 35 years old, so we're when we're talking about mid to late 80s, it's it was seen that people just either mouth breathed or nose breathed. It really wasn't seen as like an indicator of overall health. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I lived as a mouth breather for my entire childhood. And also to add to that, women in the 80s were actually being told that it's not necessary to breastfeed, that they were being told by their doctors that it's completely optional. And now we know that one of the main side effects of children who didn't breastfeed is allergies. That's like, number one thing. So So yeah, I mean, you could pretty much check every box as far as conditions that led to poor airway and jaw health. So,
What was your mind
uh,
like at that time? Were you like a bad student? How about athletics? Do you recall having sort of attention deficit issues?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad that I watched that interview, your previous one with Raina, because she actually pointed out a correlation that I hadn't thought of, which was, a correlation between, poor sleeping habits in children and childhood ADHD, or what's perceived as ADHD.
Mhm.
So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, definitely that. And it took me a while to gain any kind of athletic ability. Um, and I think that was in part due to my limited ability to deal with the elements. I'm allergic to grass.
Good God,
So
man.
yeah, yeah, it's a bummer. So fast forward. I start playing football. My aunt hates it because football is a barbaric sport, which it is. But so she wanted me to play baseball. That was it. Well, let's get him into baseball. So she took me out to play catch. God bless her heart. And so we're throwing the ball back and forth. It's nighttime, and so she throws like a pop fly, right? And the ball just happens to line up with a street light. So I couldn't get eyes on it, but I was right under it with my mitt. Well, it like smacked me right in the nose. Blood comes pouring out everywhere. So we go to the doctor. The doctor says like it's actually fine. It's not broken. It's just like he called it a minor contusion, right? So I go home, everything's fine, and as the years go by, I'm noticing that my nose is shifting. Let me show you a picture of my. So
Cute kid.
that's one of them, right? That's one of my earliest childhood pictures, and here's another one. No sign of a deviated septum or anything like that. Crooked teeth. And that was probably, as we know now, thanks to your channel and other people who are talking about this stuff.
Dr.
It
Mew,
was
yeah.
as
We got to give Dr. Mew credit on that one. He's the first one who called out malocclusion and crowding as an indicator of underdeveloped jaws.
absolutely. So it turns out that walking around breathing like it is leads to malocclusion.
Mhm.
So, here's another one. So this was after that incident, with the break. Still, just not any indication whatsoever of a deviated septum. And then here, about a year later, it's like you start seeing evidence of it. But if it were a break, if I had broken my nose,
Put that back up,
um,
Jesse. And get that photo a little closer so we can actually see it. Yeah. I mean, it's small on my screen. I can't really say that I see it, but
mhm.
maybe someone pausing the video, zooming in, could see what you're talking about there in terms of apparent deviation of the nose at that point.
So at that point, what we're seeing, based on these photos, is a gradual onset of this deviated septum, which isn't really consistent with a break. If you had broken your nose, it would be basically instantly disfigured, and it wouldn't be disfigured in the way that people think. It was actually Dr. Stephen Parks. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes, I
I
have.
watched a video. He has a fascinating video on deviated septums and how that, because he's an ENT surgeon. He says that he's never seen a patient that had this type of of deviation from a break. The types of deviations that you get from a frontal impact break is this way, not
Mhm.
this way. So blew my mind. And so he went on to say that actually what causes this type of deviated septum is a high maxilla. This is the first time, okay, I went to 2 ENTs, went under the knife 2 times. This is the first time after watching this video from Dr. Stephen Park. This is the first time I checked. This is the first time anyone has checked. So I put my finger in my mouth. I'm like, holy shit. There it is. There it was all along. You know,
It
all
was
these
under your nose the
nasal.
whole time.
It was. Thank you. Yeah, good one. Yeah. So you could see
Yeah, lean
that
back
is a.
further. Leave the camera alone and just lean back. And it's hard to see. Could you throw your phone into that? That's a little better. Throw your phone into your mouth with the flash, and then lean back just the way you were, so we can get a better sense of what your maxilla actually looks like. Lean back now. Lean back more aggressively. Yep. Now you're too far from the camera, and the thing is blocking your mouth. Come closer to the camera, Jesse, and lean back. I really want to size up your maxilla real quick. Lean back. Now put the mouth a little bit up higher. The light. Okay, right there. Stop. Okay. Yeah, it's high and vaulted. Definitely not the worst maxilla I've ever seen.
Oh,
But by
really?
no means, big either, though.
It definitely goes above the line where my nose is at. So,
Right.
so getting back to the rhinoplasties. So my first
Let me just
rhinoplasty was
summarize for a second, Jesse. Let me
Mhm.
summarize for a second. So you're saying
Okay.
you got this baseball in the nose. The doctors at
Mhm.
that point thought that your deviated septum was caused by the baseball hitting your nose. In fact, the nature of that deviation was indicative not of a impact from the baseball, but was indicative of a high, narrow maxilla, which is what you learned from Dr. Park, the ENT. So essentially, you were
A
misdiagnosed.
YouTube video.
Right, a YouTube video. Your deviated
Abs-
septum had been misdiagnosed for years. And then you
Correct.
finally
Yeah.
realized all along you had just had an underdeveloped jaw.
Misdiagnosed by 2 ENT surgeons and a
Mm-hmm.
dentist. And so that's another sort of message that I wanted to convey with this interview is that there's sort of an I'm sure that the surgeons who cut me open, that I'm sure they're good people at heart. I'm sure they have good intentions overall, but there is sort of like an exploitative aspect to it all because um, especially the second surgery. When the first surgery had failed, I felt like the second surgeon probably should have done more investigating. And I mean, an ear, nose, and throat surgeon should be able to investigate more deeply, but sort of like dentists, when there's crooked teeth, they go straight for the teeth. With if you go to an ENT surgeon with a nasal problem, they go straight for the nose. They don't investigate any other causal factors.
Yeah.
So this is right before my surgery, and as you could see, I mean, that is a huge difference. I mean, you see a little bit of a deviation right there, but I mean, let's look at one where there's no deviation whatsoever. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously, now this is during the time where boys hit their growth spurt. So
So
my maxilla is.
when you say you're seeing a deviation in that photo,
Mhm.
what are you seeing? That the nose is actually crooked?
Right, yeah. Take a look. I mean, pretty
Mm-hmm.
significantly.
Hang tight. Hold that there. I'm gonna just key you in so that we can see that a little better.
Okay.
I see. Now that's a lot better. That's a much better view.
As
Yeah, it would
compared
help if we,
to.
as compared to there. Yeah, I would say noticeably better looking as a younger boy as well.
Right? Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
definitely
uh,
more symmetrical.
yeah, you're starting to get a little bit of that adenoid face type aesthetic as you go into your adolescence.
Right.
How old are you in that photo? 12, 13?
I believe 12.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I pretty much look like that all the way up into my first surgery. So that's a little closer to the time that I had the first rhinoplasty. And
Hang tight. Hold that
obviously,
right. Put that
sure.
photo back up, Jesse.
So this is more like 15, 16.
Okay. 90s kid, huh?
Oh God. Yeah, I look like I'd listen to POD or something.
Haha,
Yeah,
love that.
um so yeah, I was definitely a child of the 90s. So um leading up to the surgery itself, obviously my concern, because I got made fun of a lot about my facial features as a kid. I wasn't getting attention from the girls that I liked, and often, sometimes got ridiculed by them. And I was treated a little differently, so uh, the the insecurity that it embedded, was a lot stronger than the concern was to open my airway. I mean, I did notice that I couldn't breathe through my nose, but once again, this is pre YouTube, and pre all this information going around from patients to patients, and us being able to figure things out at such a fast rate. Still, the belief is some people breathe through their mouth and some people breathe through their nose. And I mean, the only
Hmm.
thought that I had about it was like, I wonder one day, like, what if I get kidnapped one day and they tape my mouth shut? I'd probably suffocate, right? And that's the only really intelligible thought I had about my inability to breathe through my nose. So the biggest thing for me was, I see that I have this crooked nose, and I feel like that's the cause of people making fun of me, and it's the cause of my insecurities. I don't want to get it fixed. So that was the biggest motivator, to do it. So I go into the first surgery. Um, Apparently, he's one of the best in Vegas. I go under his knife,
How old were
and
you?
16.
Wow.
Yeah, 16. And so for
What did you
anybody
do it like
watching,
during the summer between like sophomore and junior year of high school? You did it or something?
basically, yeah, but there's still a lot of time you're gonna miss in school, because it's a brutal procedure. I mean, you could watch one now on YouTube. They cut your nose open right here, there, and lift it. It's an absolutely brutal surgery. The recovery is months long, and you're medicated the whole time. So
Hmm.
it's incredible. It's like, it's crucial for me to warn anybody who's looking at rhinoplasty that, like, there's heavy consequences to this surgery, and it's not a pleasant experience. So I was devastated, months after the surgery, when it was when the nose was going back into its original position. It's just like I had just gone through all this, pain and suffering, and it's pretty heavy on a 16-year-old. I'm missing school. I'm getting behind in my classes, and and just to have the whole thing fail. So we
When
were
you say it
persistent.
failed, what do you mean it failed?
Basically, like, at first, I could notice a marked improvement in my nasal breathing, but the nose went right back to its original position, almost like I had never had the surgery at all.
Wow.
And
It
it
re
did
it
not take long.
re-deviated?
That's correct. It redeviated, not even months, man. I mean, it happened fast. So I mean, that's devastating, to have, because you anytime you suffer, you think you're going to come out on the other end of that suffering with something to show for it, and when you don't, it hits hard, especially for a 16-year-old kid. So
Hmm.
I think this was probably after that first surgery.
Hmm. Hmm.
No improvement.
Any
So we
orthodontics up to that point?
Yeah, actually, yes. Right after this photo, and that's just another factor. I realize that this story has a lot of different factors to it, but right after this photo was taken, I got braces, to fix those, fang-like crooked teeth.
Hmm.
So I'll get back to that after the second surgery. So, after the first surgery fail, a few months later, we talked to a different surgeon who's, he's another one of the best in Vegas. So he's really confident that he can fix it. So I go under his knife, and this time, what he did was he carved away at a protruding bone right here that basically makes the nose look more crooked, more deviated. And so even though after the surgery, the nose goes back to its original position, but at least this time there is like an aesthetic improvement. This time there's a cosmetic improvement. So at least there was that. But at this
Let me
point, I'm
pause here
really
for a second, Jesse. Let me
Mhm.
pause here. So you did this all in Vegas. Rhinoplasty is generally considered a cosmetic procedure. When a celebrity gets a nose job, that nose job is formally called a rhinoplasty. Am I correct about that?
That's more of a septoplasty, like a correction of like the cartilage and stuff, like removal of humps. I believe that's, I could be incorrect
That,
about that, but there's rhinoplasties and there's septoplasties, and they're typically done in the same procedure. Like a
okay,
rhinoplasty, I believe, is like, yeah, an attempted straightening of the nose, whereas a
right.
septoplasty is a reshaping. So
I
the
see.
first one was,
Okay.
yeah, so the first one was a rhinoplasty. The second one was more of a rhinoplasty plus septoplasty.
So were the
So
surgeons? Las Vegas is probably a place where a lot of people get a lot of nose jobs, sort of like L.A. or
right.
right, because there's a lot of performers in Vegas, a lot of people trying to look their best in Vegas. There's
Hmm.
a lot of a lot of showbiz. So
Absolutely.
the surgeons you saw were probably doing tons of these nose jobs,
Hmm.
um, and so um, theoretically, they should have had a lot of experience. I guess what I'm wondering is, were they trying to do this purely as this was a functional and aesthetic procedure all at once, right? It was never purely one or the other. Is that right?
Correct, but of course, as because my mom's a nurse, so she told me like, hey, when we go in here, when we talk to these doctors, don't emphasize whatsoever that it's a cosmetic thing. Just make sure that the first priority is the fact that you cannot breathe through your nose, and you want to be
Hmm.
able to breathe through your nose. So yeah,
Right.
so going into it, these surgeons were well aware that they were going to be fixing an airway issue, and the icing on the cake of that would be that I'd have a more straight nose.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this was
Yeah. Get
after
us
the
back on
second.
track.
Okay, so
Get
this
us
is
back
after
on track.
this.
So you did this, the second procedure.
Mhm. So, getting back on track, second procedure. This is after the second procedure.
Hang tight.
Uh, uh,
Let me put that in focus.
mhm.
Okay. The
So
nose looks straight.
pretty remarkable improvement, right?
Hmm.
And that was after the nose had gone back, into its crooked position, you know, but that protruding bump was taken down. So that's what you're seeing in this picture, is there's like a protrusion of the bone, going to the
Hmm.
right side of my face, that was carved down.
Hmm.
And the ending result was that. So cosmetically, a great outcome. However, years later, I still can't breathe through my nose. And it's not until now, it's not until your content, that I've been watching, and the Stephen Parks video, and then there was Evan Leviz. I can't pronounce that last name.
Yeah. Evan Levizade.
Levizada, Levizade. Okay, Evan Levizade. Yeah, so he had another video where he's trying to get his deviated septum addressed, and he basically talked about two things that would tell you that your deviated septum is a result of a high maxilla, and that's if when you smile, like you see these dark areas. That's an indicator of a very narrow bite, and probably a high vaulted maxilla. And also, so and just like doing the finger test, if your finger goes above the point of your nose, and obviously it's pushing into your nasal space or where the cartilage is, causing it to buckle. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so I go and get the braces removed. Now, orthodontists are something else, man. Because so he actually had to carve away at my teeth to make my bite, to make the top teeth fit on the bottom teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's incredible because if you have to carve away somebody's teeth, then you overcorrected. So I mean, the braces were not, I don't think a huge factor in the high maxilla. It didn't help because, I mean, you're still developing as a boy. You're still developing from your teenage years all the way up until mid-20s. So the braces didn't help. Obviously, the high maxilla was there to begin with, and you could tell going through my growth spurt that it continued to grow upward. And during that time, you can see with the pictures that the nose very gradually goes into this position. So, he takes off the braces and he carved away at my fangs, which is it's a bummer because that's actually seen as a very attractive quality in men, is having those fangs. And he shaved them down to such a degree that every now and then, my mom, she was just like, "Did you chip your tooth or something?" And I'm
Wow.
like, "No, the dentist did that. You see that?
Mm-hmm. He flattened it.
He flattened it."
Yeah.
So I mean, I can't believe some of the things that orthodontists will do to kids. And so that's a third. What I'm getting at is that's a third professional. That's a third person with a medical license who didn't look. Nobody looked until I saw this YouTube video and put my finger in there. I was like, "Holy shit!" There's a whole issue right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, go now that I'm 35, I'm starting to have issues with plantar fasciitis and other things that are sort of related to poor jaw health. Because I had learned from your videos that that these facial asymmetries travel throughout the body. So it starts with the jaws, and then the shoulders, the neck, the shoulders, the back, the hips, and then the feet. So there's definitely neck problems, shoulder problems, hip problems, and feet problems as a result of not mewing. You know, uh, uh, you know, throughout the span of my childhood. Um, so yeah, I'm dealing with some pretty severe issues, from that. But yeah, I mean, the main message was that if you're thinking about getting a rhinoplasty, to correct airway issues, check that first. Because that would, oh my God, I mean, I essentially missed a whole year of school. I never recovered from that. It's just like, I just basically just became a shitty student after that because I was so far behind. I gave up.
Yeah, and a lot
You
of
know,
people watching might not realize that in the early 2000s or late 90s, whenever this was, there was no Zoom, there was no remote learning. It was like if you weren't in school, you were not seeing the action. You were out. So
basically, yeah.
yeah. So you just were like completely disconnected from the curriculum that your
Mm-hmm.
classmates were going through at that time, and I'm sure that had downstream effects on your, your college experience, if any, and
Mm-hmm.
your confidence as a well-to-do professional who was embarking on a career. That probably stunted you in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I would, I fantasize. It's hard not to fantasize about how differently my life would have panned out, if somebody would have just looked, if somebody would have just said, "Oh, he has a very, very narrow maxilla, and if we fix that, he'll be able to breathe through his nose, and that will give him marked improvement in his athletic abilities. He'll be able to sleep better. Those ADHD like behaviors that he has would, would reduce. And, so, I mean, things would have panned out so much differently if somebody just gave a shit, just
Now,
cared enough
something,
to look.
and when you say cared enough to look, for people just listening, not watching, you keep pointing to the roof of your mouth, but you're talking about they didn't notice your underdeveloped jaws and they just focused on the nose, and that was the key. They didn't see the underdevelopment of your arch as the root cause of everything you were suffering.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so I guess that's another thing, I'd like to leave the audience with is, and I'm sure they already know at this point, in this age of information, don't trust somebody just because they have a medical license. Because, I mean, this should have been so obvious, especially
Mm-hmm.
after the first failed surgery. That, and I recently went to a doctor. So here's another thing. Here's another reason why you shouldn't trust people with degrees, just, because they have degrees. So, uh, I'm interested in this whole thing with expansion. So I'm starting to get abrasions on my teeth. I have to get regular fillings about like once every few years, because what happens is my bite is too tight. So just by chewing, it's like grinding. It's like somebody who's grinding their teeth aggressively. So I don't grind my teeth, but because my bite's so tight, it's creating abrasions on the top
Mm-hmm.
of the bottom teeth. So I regularly every so often have to go in and get fillers. So they're correcting that. They're like, he's just a grinder, So they're, they put fillers in my teeth. And so this time, after, being armed with information from your channel, I was like, hey, I think my teeth are really narrow, and that's the cause of the issue. And so she looks inside. She's like, whoa, like you have a cavernous, roof of your mouth. Your maxilla is like a cave. Like, definitely, yeah. You should definitely get expansion done for that, and that would, fix the abrasions that are happening on your teeth. So it's only when I mentioned it is when they considered it. And here, but
Mm-hmm.
just as a side story to this whole thing, in that same visit, the dentist didn't notice it, but the dental assistant is taking a look at my X-rays, right? And he's just like, "What's that?" So he points at this thing. There's a piece of metal in my mouth that nobody noticed. So when I got my wisdom teeth pulled, was, check another box for bad jaw health, right? I had my wisdom teeth pulled at 22. When he pulled my wisdom tooth off, part of his tool broke off, and it's just been sitting in my mouth for a decade. And I've been to this same dentist year after year, and nobody mentioned it or noticed it. I don't know if they were just trying to protect the dentist who took out, my wisdom teeth. They're like, oh shit, maybe we shouldn't talk about that. But, or they just don't look enough. They're seeing hundreds of patients a week, and unless you bring it to their attention. So I brought it to the nurse's attention when she came in, or the the dentist, that, hey, your dental assistant found something interesting. There's a tool in my mouth. And she's just like, oh shit, well, I guess you better get that removed.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we're talking about, just, I mean, I've been the bearer of bad luck when it comes to incompetence with people
Yeah.
who have a medical license. So, you know hopefully your audience takes that as a big warning, to, consider that, you know make sure that you're bringing things that should be considered to the table, because these um the surgeons, like I said, problem with the nose, they go right for the nose. All I would have taken was just, especially after the first failed surgery. I mean, there was a precedent for failure. So you would have thought, hey, well, I don't want, the surgeon would have been like, well, I don't want my procedure to fail. So let's look a little more closely at this. And
Yeah.
he didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, you're certainly not the only one who's had the root cause of their symptoms um, misdiagnosed, missed for decades at a time. A large constituency of my viewers is in the same boat. and hopefully some of the younger ones experiencing the things you experienced as a 16-year-old and younger can learn from your lesson. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, this is something you and I have discussed
Mhm.
offline to some extent, was cannabis use. And we've both in our time struggled. Maybe I'll speak for myself as an
Mhm.
introduction to this. And if you don't want to talk about this, we don't have to. You can just say, but I've struggled since my teen years with a constant urge to use cannabis as a way of sort of making myself feel better in my body. And I think starting that as a teenager has, and when the brain was in its formative years, has caused me to sort of develop this lifelong sort of tick inside of my neurology to want to go back to that feeling. Um,
Mhm.
and I wonder how much my airway issues as a teenager have contributed to that whole downward spiral with that cope as well. Um, if you'd rather not talk about it, we don't have to, but I'll give you an opportunity to chime in.
It's an interesting correlation that I haven't really explored very much, but I'm starting to see the connections. I'm starting to see the dots that you could connect, by hearing Reina's story as well. Um, just the fact that, somebody who has ADHD, could be stemming from, a poor breathing, which could be affecting the child's sleep, which affects their focus. So, I mean, one of the biggest draws toward marijuana was like hyper focus. It's like there was nothing that I liked doing better than smoking and playing music.
Mhm.
So that was like that's the thing that I did that would really help me zero in on things because I had a really difficulty focusing on tasks.
Right. Right. So your body was probably not producing its own sort of happy chemicals because your sleep
Hmm.
was messed up. And so your endocrine system, your hormones were messed up. And the only way for you to dose dopamine and other happy chemicals that make you feel motivated to sit down and,
Hmm.
master a riff or whatever, you had to
Hmm.
seek that exogenously in the form of cannabis. And then, once you start down that path, the only way to experience that level of dopamine again is to obviously reuse.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I did it for 10 years, like heavy usage. I mean, we're talking like, Snoop Dogg level, smoking, from morning till night. I mean, multiple times a day. So, I was a stoner. I was a stoner all throughout high school. And that's another thing I think would have been much different you know, had I had a father in the household too. I mean, there's definitely like a disciplinary issue with that, which we're
Yeah.
seeing less and less of, and that's why so many of our youth are going awry and having all these different issues. Is it's physical, it's psychological, neurological. There's just so many factors that are leading to just skyrocketing rates of ADHD, autism. I mean, Reina, said that she had ADHD. It's like, it's more often than not that I hear about an adolescent because she's 18 years old. So, about in her age group, I it's like most of them that I talk to, they all classify themselves as having either like as being on the spectrum or having ADHD, and it's just like what's going on here,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So have you heard of like Dr. Walsh and the Walsh Protocol and his ideas about like how diet can you talk about keto a little bit, so I mean, how
Yeah.
much of
I'm
that do
familiar
you
with
think is?
I'm familiar with the idea that obviously what you eat has a major impact on how you feel and on chronic
Mhm.
illnesses, and even psychiatric and psychological conditions. But yeah, what was your question?
Well, my question was just like, in your opinion, how much is it, that diet is affecting these sort of like neurological, um, you know, these like atypical neurological tendencies.
It's a pillar, man. It's a pillar. It's definitely
Hmm.
not uh, the silver bullet. Not no one thing is the silver bullet, but if there were, let's say, three or four silver bullets, certainly nutrition and diet and toxicity that comes through your mouth into your gut is a major one. Jaw development is a major one, right? So
Hmm.
the analogy I've always used in trying to understand health, especially chronic disease, right, is that health is behind a door, but that door doesn't have one lock. That door has many locks. And to get
Hmm.
through that door to the health side of the room requires opening up all of those locks. Any one lock will not get you there, right? So
Right.
even though my channel often comes off as sort of suggesting that making your mouth bigger and solving your airway problem is sort of the key to everything, that's definitely not my position. And diving into my content a little bit deeper, you find that um, I'm mostly saying that it's a necessary step for a lot of people to make their jaws adequate, but that certainly nutrition is a major, major, major factor. I've always advocated like I would say a meat and vegetables diet, meat, fruit, and vegetables. The best elimination diet, in my opinion, is a meat only diet, clean beef, right? Clean fatty fish. For a while, maybe only that as a way of eliminating all potential toxicity from your food intake. But where I've sort of landed with diet is like 60 to 70% animal, and then another 30% of whatever bullshit I want. So like I usually start my meals with a big serving of beef or whatever other animal flesh is present, and then I'll have a serving of vegetables or fruit or even dessert, chocolate, pastry, rice, whatever's kicking around. And it's sort of like it's sort of a paleo diet when all is said and done, but a meat heavy paleo diet is sort of where I've landed. And to me, that's sustainable. And yeah, that's where I'm at on diet. But I think that having an egregiously poor diet, like a processed carb heavy diet, for example, or a vegan or vegetarian diet where you're not only are you putting in toxins into your body in the form of processed foods or the wrong plants,
Hmm.
but you're just not getting the right building blocks either. You're lacking fat and protein basically. I think that can wreak havoc on a person's entire being.
Definitely. I mean,
Machines
and
need fuel.
right, right. See, and when I was, how old are you, Ron?
33.
33. So I'm 35. So when we were growing up, we didn't have access to all this information, and the public had not yet become suspicious about what was in our food. So when I was growing up, I mean, it was all about convenience. I mean, like I said, my mom, she didn't have bad intentions or anything like that. She was doing the best she could, but she was going to school, and convenience was a huge factor. So I mean, there was a lot of canned soup dinners, a lot of top
Mhm.
ramen, and just eating so much crap. And yeah, it makes me wonder, hey, you know, what about my life could have been better, different, if that was, if I was eating healthy, if I
Yeah.
was eating more protein. But as you know, like, canned soups and top ramen and pizza pockets. Oh man, pizza pockets were the bomb, man. Those were my
Hell
favorite.
yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
hell yeah.
you can never get it like right in the middle though. Um,
What do you mean? Like it was always cold in the middle?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was always cold in the middle. I mean, they gave you the sleeves too. Remember, like you'd put it in the sleeve so
The
it
little
could
box?
like cook thoroughly. Yeah, yeah, and it's still, man, it's still cold in the center.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
all the other parts were great. Um, so yeah, just really poor diet growing up. I don't know if that was the same for you, if you had sort of like a traditional household where your mom was cooking a lot or anything like that.
I did,
That
man.
definitely
My
wasn't.
mom is Lebanese, and she was cooking whole food all the time. But I had my
Mhm.
fair share of garbage, for sure. Um, but on the whole, I would say dietarily, it could have been a lot worse for me. Could have been a
Hmm.
lot worse. But obviously, I was messing up my intake at that time with a lot of booze and a lot of weed and mouth breathing. So I was getting my fair share of garbage into my system, even though my diet was sort of a strong point, I would say. Fortunately for me. And hey, that's why I think I did okay. Like, I got
Hmm.
through high school and college with pretty good results. But that, that's in large part because I had such great family support. I had a perfect childhood in terms of like emotional support, and
That's great.
community and parental guidance. And I don't take that for granted. And I'm still very close with my parents and still eating a lot of my mom's home cooked Lebanese food.
Oh man, Lebanese food is the best.
Hell yeah.
Now
Hell
there's
yeah.
there's a lot of
So,
crossover with Lebanese food and Mediterranean food, right? It's sort of
yeah,
similar.
it's
Yeah,
Lebanese food is Mediterranean. So
gotcha.
yeah, Lebanon is on the Mediterranean coast. So
That's
it's
what they
very
they s-
similar to like
they
Greek cuisine.
they say that's like the number one healthiest diet is Mediterranean. But yeah, I think it's a little carb heavy, in my
Can
opinion.
be.
But I mean, you you X out some of the carbs like the pita bread and the falafels and stuff like that. You got a lot of meat and veggies. So I mean,
It's pretty much
just
it, man. And fresh fruit.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, for sure.
Jesse, what's your plan going forward? Like, you're 35, you've still got
Hmm.
your whole life ahead of you. You've pretty
Hmm.
much figured this out. You know what you need to do. Like, what's next for you?
Well, continue to educate myself and keep watching your channel and the interesting guests that you bring on. I love your channel. I love what you're doing out there, educating people. Um, as far as my personal health, I exercise regularly. So since I don't have the best airway, I figure I can compensate with this thing. This is the O2 trainer, and I'm sure there's like better products out there, more quality products for like exercising your lungs, the muscles that are responsible for expansion of the lungs. But it creates resistance. Like, so with that resistance, it puts like a kind of creates like a brain to muscle relationship with the muscles that expand and contract the lungs. So
Hmm.
it's been a small improvement. It's like what you were saying. It's like there's many pillars to your health. There's not going to be this one thing. I mean, even Evan, on his channel, talks about how with the expansion and the correction of his deviated septum, he was actually experiencing a marked improvement in his airway that declined as time went on. So as these things become locked in as we're older, it's like it's you just kind of have to start doing all these different things that create smaller pieces of improvement, because the more of these things that you do that create just a little bit of improvement here and there, this thing's not going to correct my airway issues, but it's a tiny little improvement that can make my life just a little better. So I pair that with the exercise. I pair that with proper diet, maybe reading and writing and just brain stimulation, just things that playing music, whatever makes you happy, just therapeutic activities. And now we have like uh, more of a behavioral structure that is conducive to overall happiness and health.
I'm totally with you, and that's my exact approach. I don't think that health is something that uh, you get there and then all the energy is no longer needed and there's no more work to be done. I think that all jaw expansion really does is give you an opportunity to maximize good habits. It just checks
Mm-hmm.
off that box that limited real estate in your mouth and nose give you, but that you still need to have a healthy lifestyle and use that real estate to drive your body and mind into a good place. And the effort can never stop. Like, it's a lifelong uh, it's a lifelong project,
Especially for
and
people like you and I mean, off camera, we were talking about sort of our battle with depression, and you kind of related to something that I said, that it's like I'm always just two steps ahead of my depression. And like, did you feel that way? Like, can you remember being like a small child and being depressed, or is that something that like did depression sort of sort of introduce itself later in life?
Depression introduced itself later in life for me.
Mm.
I did not experience depression. I didn't even know what it was or what it felt like, I would say, until late in my college years, when I had been completely pulled away from my local home, family, community structure. Because, like, my hometown where I live in Massachusetts, I have such an incredible family and friend network that even though my health may have been imperfect or lacking severely for certain stretches, I always had such a robust sort of community around me of good friends and family, that my brain never fell that low, where I was never like sitting there and thinking life wasn't worth living, or that I didn't want to go on, or um, uh, that I was so deeply unhappy that I was somehow non-functional. I didn't experience that until I went away to Bates College in Maine, was ripped away from my community, and was sort of uh, I was more atomized at that point, right? It was more just me, my body, and this sort of foreign world that I was in. And in that environment, I felt um, sort of negative mental states, much heavier negative mental states that were totally new to me, and I was startled by it. And uh, at certain times, I was like, "Whoa, what is this? Like, am I broken? Like, is my mind like permanently fucked, like into this negative state that I'm in?" And I would eventually pull out and sort of normalize. And then for the next, I would say, 10 years, as I graduated, sort of traveled for many years, continued to go off and be alone and practice Buddhism, live in my van, try different jobs and sort of search for a career. I would continually dip down into that low mental state, and then bounce back out of it until eventually I realized, okay, this is an impermanent thing that occurs in my mind and in my body. And it's not a disease that is somehow like me, and I can just ride these valleys and then ride them back up until I normalize again. And if I just keep putting in the proper inputs, the valleys get shallower and shorter, and I don't have to be afraid of going to that place mentally. Um, and so accepting the impermanence of the sort of depressive states, and also knowing that it was in my control to put in inputs that limited them, has allowed me to sort of just have no fear of that, and just sort of be on top of it. So I would say that I'm in a good place in terms of depression, but that I first encountered it sort of in my late teens, early 20s, and had a tumultuous decade experiencing it to different depths and durations, but that I feel like I'm sort of on top of it for now.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me it was always there, but my dad wasn't in the house, and I think that made me sad sometimes. And I just kind of remember my teachers early on being like, "Hey kid, like you should smile more often." Like, what's, they would notice that I was a little different, than the other kids, that I sort of had this like sad demeanor when it's like that. And that's not really not normal, for kids. I mean, usually kids at that age in elementary school, they're socializing, they're playing. And I just remember having certain days where, yeah, I remember the teacher would, "Hey, is everything all right? Are things at home okay? Is there anything you want to talk about?" And and I think usually I would just say, "Oh, I just miss my dad." I probably came back from seeing my dad, you know, um, in Kansas City, Missouri. So, if I'd fly back to California, and I think I'd be sad for a little bit, and then, so like I said, I got made fun of a lot because of my crooked nose, and so I had a lot of insecurities, which led to a very unhealthy relationship with women. in my life, the girls that I would date, I would basically, if things didn't work out, um, which they often wouldn't, because I mean, I seemed like a cool guy at first, and then, a girl would get into a relationship with me and realize, hey, he's kind of clingy. There's something wrong here. So, as soon as you become clingy as a guy, that's just, that's repellent, for girls.
Totally.
So,
Totally.
so and so the more that they would, the more that they would retract from the relationship, the more I would try to cling, and it became extremely unhealthy, and it became it got to the point to where it was obsessive, and it was, extremely bad for my mental health. I would, if I had a failed relationship, it would take months to recover from it. I mean, I would go through this long stage of depression because the core of my existence relied on the approval of this person, because I never got a whole lot of approval early. My parents weren't together. My mom was working. I was very much a spoiled child growing up. So my grandmother and my aunt had a huge part in raising me. And as the no one is going to give you the kind of family structure that you're going to get with a mother and a father in the house. That you get the perfect structure for child rearing. And since I didn't get that, I didn't have a sense of self that reached inward into my soul. It was dependent on other people's approval of me, which is
Hmm.
probably why I became, a singer in a band. It's like I was a touring musician for 15 years, and starting very early in my life, because I love to be on the stage. Probably some of the most insecure people you'll meet are people who got to be in the front of the band, in front of the audience. Singers, we're the most like self-critical, and so I I definitely, I'm glad I got that addressed. I didn't start, figuring all this stuff out until I, got into the like sort of male self improvement, um, spaces. Like, we talked about earlier. I mean, you were one of the first, like you're the first cohort. You and I are the first cohort of people who started getting into Neil Strauss and when he introduced, PUAs to the world. Before that, they were sort of like a secret society, like that
Right.
only
Right.
accepted few people into their little gang. But then, Neil Strauss wrote about it, and it's sort of kind of, you know, taken a few different branches. You have the red pill, and then you have, the the old school PUAs that are still around,
Hmm.
kind of doing more of like a positivity grift, more than
Hmm.
anything. But I mean, whatever it is, if it leads people to have more of a stable sense of self that's dependent on what we do with our time and what we accomplish, I mean, that was the biggest thing for me, because obviously for me, I was just hyper focused on my looks and how people saw me.
Hmm.
And I noticed that, a lot of the people that you talk to that were originally probably insecure and had facial problems and deformities, they get to that space where they're like, what, I don't care anymore. It's just, I just want the improvement of of the health benefits,
Hmm.
like the improved airway. If there's any cosmetic improvement to my facial features, it's it would be just icing on the cake. But I feel my sense of self doesn't come from, my beauty, or, other people's approval of me, so
Hmm. Hmm.
anyway.
Yeah, I think that um, for me, thinking you asked me earlier about my own experience with depression, probably one of the roots of why I would dip into depressive states when I went away to college is because in high school, I had what in PUA or red pill communities they call like social circle game. Like because my brother and sister were a senior and a sophomore in high school ahead of me when I became a freshman. And that was that way throughout grade school too. They were always a few years ahead of me, paving the way for me. My brother was super athletic and super cool and popular, and my sister, really pretty, really cool girl. They were always the man, right? And so I was their kid brother. And so I was naturally, people wanted to hang out with me because they wanted to like just latch on to me and rise in their social status
Nice.
by being my friend, right? And
Yeah, yeah. You had some like status sort of like waiting for you that they
and the
had
whole idea,
established for you, right?
exactly, I rode their
Yeah.
coattails essentially into power.
Nice. Yeah.
And like in PUA, there's this whole idea of like social circle game where it's like just be part of a friend group and let other people see you as part of this social network, and that makes you more attractive. Like the way people meet each other is through friends and like as part of the same community, because you instantly have social proof. Oh, other people like you, therefore you must be likable. That's how humans think. Like so much of marketing depends on social proof. Oh, this person uses it, therefore it must be a good product, right? That's the whole
Herd
theory
mentality,
behind
right?
influencing. Like an influencer, what is an influencer? They use something and then other people want to use it because they use it, right? So when I went into high school, this went to the X level, like because my brother was a football player and then like my sister was really cool, and like in high school my freshman year, my brother got in a fist fight and kicked this kid's ass at this big basketball game at the biggest basketball game of the year, full auditorium, probably 5,000 people there. My brother whoops this kid's ass in front of 5,000 people. 2 weeks later was the election for class president. And literally, my speech was just like, my brother kicked that kid's ass. Next time, I'm going to do it, or some bullshit like that. Right. And I was elected class president. And
Wow.
then now I'm the class president.
Different
Right.
times.
And
Yeah.
so, right. And so, I was always popular effortlessly. I stumbled into it. Then when I went away to college, I was nobody. I was just this weird towny kid from this no this you know
I see.
this unknown town in Massachusetts. Meanwhile, these kids are from New York City and San Francisco and Miami and all these cool cultured places, and I'm like the kid still wearing the hoodie and the Timbs who doesn't know how to deal with these cool cultured people. And I was totally intimidated, totally put on my heels. And because I never had to understand game explicitly, I always just accidentally had game because I assumed confidence because it was always just assumed upon me. Now I was like totally lost. And I would say a big part of my depression was that I lost my confidence to like deal with women at that time.
Hmm.
And that's big for a man. Like when a man feels incompetent in dealing with women and feels like he's not attractive, that fucks you up. That's like
Yeah,
a big part of the core of it for a man. And so,
absolutely.
um, at
It's in
that
our
point,
biology.
for sure, for sure,
Mhm.
it's like Jordan Peterson says with the lobsters, right? Like his whole shtick about the lobsters is that they have this chemical in their brain,
Mhm.
serotonin, I believe, that's just constantly monitoring your status in the social hierarchy. That
Right, right,
biochemical mechanism is older than trees, right? And so,
right.
um, yeah, I'd spent the next 10 years sort of rebuilding my game upon that foundation. I had to
A
do it.
brand new foundation,
uh,
because it sounds like you were completely separated from this structure. I mean, your well-to-do family, your siblings, the culture that you grew up in, which you were a part of. Now you're just completely uprooted, right? And put into a completely different culture where it's like you probably try to almost bring your ways with you, right, to this new place. And it's like when in Rome, when you do the Rome, you acclimate to your environment. But that's really difficult for young men. That was difficult for me. I almost, like when I moved to Colorado, I tried to bring my California attitude with me, and it's not like you have to change. It's just with some time and patience, you do acclimate to the social situation and the social milieu that surrounds you. But it takes time, and it's like as a kid, you just want it to work. You're noticing that, for you probably you're like, man, girls aren't really like noticing me as much anymore. Like, I don't know, the competition seems a bit fierce out here. It's like I was the man and now I'm not the man. And so I imagine that contributed a lot to your depression, and you pretty much had to rebuild yourself and your confidence from the ground up after having been uprooted. And I mean,
100%.
we were talking about Cal Newport. Like, how much did literature and self improvement authors help you in that? Like, did you find that during that time, or was it later?
It was during that time. It was during that time. Yeah, my first instinct when I started feeling aimless and lost with regards to how to function socially was to figure it out. And I think if there's one thing that guys who dabble in PUA and red pill have in common, it's a problem solving attitude. And they find the answers in the form of PUA content where rules are laid out and experiences are shared that give an indicator as to diagnosing the problem and then curing the problem. So I have this memory of so someone gave me Neil Strauss's book The Game in 2010
Mm,
when I was a sophomore in high school, and then I realized, holy shit, there's a whole science to this, right? There's a whole science to social dynamics, how to
mm,
interact with people. And even though I had been doing it naturally before and effortlessly, now
mm.
I was explicitly understanding the rules of the game, and the rules that I had already been leveraging, I now had a name for it and a sort of reproducible process for entering into that state that I was sort of given as a gift in my high school social circle. And so I had, then I think my next book was The Mystery Method by
Mhm.
Mystery. And that got more into inner game. And at that point, um, a lot of the game books, they distinguished between inner game and outer game. And like outer game was more of like pickup lines and how to approach. And inner game was more of just like getting you into a mind state where game just sort of flowed out of you. And when I say game, all I really mean is decent social dynamics in dealing with people, men,
Right.
women, business, dating, all of it. Just like how to be cool, right?
Well, because
Um,
it started as here's what you can do to mimic the behaviors of somebody who has inner game, and then finally, after the forums, the So Suave forums, and after more discussions between the PAs were happening, it's like the PUA community sort of morphed into just like a huge emphasis on inner game, as opposed to like, here, remember all these lines, because that's sort of like what the first generation PUAs were about, was like, I don't know if you remember that, how he was talking about like most of the guys who were taking these classes were like computer programmers, so many computer programmers, right?
yeah,
And they were locked in a cubicle somewhere, just learning code. Very little social intelligence, very little social interaction. So it's just like, here's a list, here's of things that you can do to sort of mock the behaviors of somebody who has inner game, which is what they call frame now, masculine frame. There's masculine and feminine frames. And when it started, because I was definitely susceptible to, it's like, okay, I'm just copy these behaviors, and sometimes it worked, but I think more so the women that were in my life at the time were just sort of like, sort of flattered that I was, taking this approach, and they probably saw right through. They're like, yeah, this guy, I know this guy's not for real. I know he's sort of like insecure, but he's being cute. He's saying and doing all the right things, and saying the lines, and feigning confidence.
sure.
Yeah, and it wasn't until like the actual red pill community, you know, uh, went out there, got out there, was, when I started like making the real connections, just like, hey, this stuff has to, you can't just follow guidelines, you know, on how to you know, because those things stopped working after a while. It's just like I think he even talks about it at the end of the game, at the end of because the way that the game wraps up is almost sort of like Fight Club, right? Where things sort of get a little weird, and you know they go around, you know, dropping lines, opening up, you know, sessions with girls, and the girls are looking at each other like, why is every dude coming up to us saying that same line? You know,
Right.
so,
Right.
you know, it's just like, you know, that creative place that those guys came from. I mean, Mystery was out there banging his head on the wall, you know, trying to figure this stuff out. I mean, he did more for the field of psychology in terms of intergender dynamics than any psychologist to date.
Yeah.
You know, he got out in the field, banged his head against the wall until he figured out things that worked, and then he wrote them down and gave them to the world. But you know what it turned out, you know, that made, you know, men successful in their relationships was just a strong sense of inner self, and those things are spiritual. You know, those things come from what we do, you know, our relationships with other people. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
cool that we're
Yeah.
talking about this. You know, there's not many people who go back that far when it comes to, you know, the PUA thing.
Definitely for me, the most useful piece of PUA content was RSD Tyler's book, The Blueprint Decoded. And his thesis in that book was basically that game is a naturally flows from entering into what he called state. And for me, that was so helpful because I realized that all my whole high school experience was one huge state experience, right? I was in state that whole time. State is just sort of where and I'm sure everyone who's listening to this has experienced it to some degree, even if in short blips. It's where you're in that kind of mood where you just feel great, you feel confident, and you're
Mm.
able to just sort of flow and say things that are awesome and cool and natural sounding, and be amongst other people and feel good about it and have fun and be self amusing and sort of be the life of the party and just be cool in that moment. And it's
And you're
not
not trying.
you're not scripted. You're just coming from a place. You feel it in your body, and it just sort of flows out of you. So a lot of that book was about how to enter into state, and so there would be things like before you go out on a date, sing your favorite song really loud to yourself, so that your brain and your voice sort of come into sync. Because a lot of it's like that. It's just about getting your mouth and your mind and your body up and alive rather than feeling sort of stifled and stunted in your voice. And now that guy, David Rubin, I think Rick Rubin, right? The guy who's everyone goes to like ask him about how he gets um, his musical genius to help all of these famous artists produce these songs. And he talks about the same thing, about how all he ever did was get his artists into state, just get them
Yeah,
into that
I just
flow.
read I just read his book, The Creative Act, and I must say it's, as a musician, one of the most inspiring books I've ever read. Yeah, because it's just that it's a lot of like, you know, being true to yourself, don't lie to yourself, you know, that there's just because it definitely, and man, I wish I had a mentor like him in my musical career, because when I look back, a lot of the mistakes that I made in my musical career was wanting to win over the audience. But really, you know, the first person you have to win over is yourself. You have to be happy with what you're doing, because if you're not happy with what you're doing, you're not completely sold on it, and if it's being done with the express purpose of building an audience, ironically, you don't build the audience. You know, it's like it's these truly. I mean, he's worked with some of the most original artists that have ever faced. You know, that have ever been on the face of the earth. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, you know, and he was able to harness that originality in a way that is just so refreshing. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
into metal and stuff like that, so you know, System of a Down was one of my favorite bands growing up, and I mean, they have this goofiness about them, and if they had tried to, you know, blend in with what was happening at the time, and just, you know, for the sake of maybe increasing record sales, they wouldn't have been who they were, you know. So it really, you know, it starts with, and I'm sure the example, I'm sure people can definitely see how this example as you know, being a musician translates in other areas, but you know, just speaking purely as a musician, it's like it really starts with how well you like what you're doing, because that's going to resonate. Like when you're on stage and you're just loving what you're doing, that's what sells it.
Mhm.
Not what you think, you know, not what you think is going to sell, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, that definitely that flow state, but it was man, that was an incredible book. It was like, it's almost like a meditation. His words were so carefully picked. I think that it's not getting enough credit for the editing process that went into it, because it's a very short book. It's very to the point, but it's almost like each and every individual word just flows beautifully. It's such a good book.
Would you
And then
say
there
that
was
book
and then
would be like a would you say that book would be like a good game book for someone who's trying to understand how to improve their social skills? Could they implement some of what he teaches with regards to finding your authentic voice and just letting it flow?
I think so. I think so. I think, you know, there's a lot in there that's very specific to, you know, the experience of the artist, you know, the experience of the musician. So I think
Mhm.
people outside of that sphere might not really get what he's saying, but there definitely is an emphasis. I mean, watch the guy's interviews, you know, and you definitely hear a lot of that. It really does start with you first, and like, and
Mhm.
how well you're enjoying what you're doing, because when you're enjoying what you're doing, when you're one with yourself, it resonates. And not, you know, if your intention is to win everybody over, you got it wrong, you know. And
Yeah.
that was sort of, you know, that goes right along the lines with my personal insecurities that filtered into my music career, where it's just like, man, we're not getting enough people, you know, to our merch table after the shows, who are buying merch and like us, you know. But really, um you know, the more successful, the artists today that I admire the most aren't the artists that have this huge appeal. I mean, you know, Taylor Swift is ubiquitous, for example. I mean, The Weeknd is ubiquitous. You know, the people who I really enjoy is those people who have these small audiences but incredibly dedicated. And I think that is sort of true in your audience too, right? I mean, you don't have like the biggest audience. You might not have the same amount of subscriptions or views that other influencers get, but the people who do watch your channel are really dedicated, and they want more of you. Which is, I mean, it worked for I wanted to, you know, get the one-on-one and the follow-up, because you know, I was really interested in your content and what you provide.
No, I appreciate that, man. And yeah, there may be some truth to that. I've always felt that my audience is definitely not huge, but when I meet people who reach out to me through chats, they've often watched my entire catalog. They've treated it like a textbook. They've mastered the main lessons that I've put out, and I'm just like, holy shit, people really take this seriously. And I'm always tremendously flattered by that. And I'm by no means, and I've even had videos that have gone viral, like my Conor McGregor wisdom teeth video, or my videos on why not to extract wisdom teeth. They're shorts. And what I found is when those videos reach a wider audience, and the feedback that they get is actually very negative. So I don't want a wide audience of people who don't get it. You know what I mean? Um, I
Right.
want I want to build a community of people who are trying to solve this problem and understand airway health and the different expanders that are out there and jaw surgery. Like I want that bottom of the funnel, deep content, and not surface level, like appeal to the masses type content. You know,
Right. I
because
mean, you
it's
have what you have and you're happy with it. Right.
for sure, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. So, um, listen, man, I actually got to jump onto my next call. I didn't think we were going to butt up against it, but here we are.
Cool. No,
And
I love talking to you, man.
dude, thanks for sharing everything, and thanks for making yourself vulnerable and diving into some of the difficult things that you've had to deal with in your life. And I'm sorry about all that you've had to deal with when it, with regards to your family life and your health and um, physical ridicule that you've suffered. Um, And I applaud you for having figured it out. I applaud you for having survived. Okay, because not everyone does, literally. And I just hope that whatever's next for you in this next phase of your life, right, the next 5, 10 years, 35 to 45, I hope you can implement the lessons you've learned and you can just maybe have the best decade of your life so far. That's my sincere wish for you. And I'm putting myself out here as willing to help in any way that I can.
Well, thanks, Ron. It's people like you that make it possible. People who are willing to put information out there into the public and be of help. So yeah, I appreciate your content and anybody else who's out there spreading positivity, across YouTube and everywhere else. But yeah, man, let's keep in touch.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot, Jesse.
Take care.
Bye bye.